Well, hello, friends. We'll just give a couple of minutes to people to discover the webinar. But meanwhile, I just want to say warm welcome to the CCSN Global Climate Week webinars. And today presentation, as many of you know, is a part of our monthly series of presentations leading to the Global Climate Change Week 2026 and also GVSU Climate Change Education Solutions Summit. Meanwhile, as everyone is discovering us, I just want to use this time to remind you that the dates of this year CCSS are October 14, and this is going to happen on our beautiful Valley campus at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, just west of Grand Rapids, and October 15 virtually. And this second virtual day is, of course, easily accessible worldwide for all our international presenters. The call for proposals is now open through July 31st, so please don't forget to submit your proposal for this year Climate Summit, and this is always free, both for all our presenters and participants. And also, please remember to register your Global Climate Change Week event on our website, so it will be included on the global map. And you can go on this global map anytime and discover many amazing events that have been already registered around the world. So this is a great inspiration for all of us. My name is Elena Lubimtseva, and I'm a professor of geography at GVSU and one of the founders of Climate Change Education Solutions Network. I want to acknowledge that we are gathering on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Three Fires Council of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people here in West Michigan. Now, today is my absolute privilege to introduce an inspiring environmental science and climate educator, Bridget Booth, and to thank Bridget for joining us today for this conversation. Bridget is not a stranger to the CCSN. She gave a fantastic workshop at Fall Climate Summit in Muskegon, and I'm absolutely excited to continue this conversation with her today. Bridget Booth is a middle school science teacher at Haslett Middle School in East Lansing in Michigan. She's a certified environmental educator working towards integrating outdoor and climate education to public education curriculum through student-driven action and advocacy. Bridget also serves as a board member, and she is a past president of Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Education. She currently also serves as Michigan State Lead for SubjectToClimate and manages Michigan Climate Education Hub. And this is, of course, our main focus of conversation today. So if you missed her October 2025 presentation at the GVSU Climate Summit, From Learning to Leadership, using the Michigan Climate Education Hub to support youth-led action, today is really a wonderful opportunity to reconnect with Bridget or connect with her for the first time and ask questions about the Michigan Climate Education Hub. This presentation is being recorded and it's going to be posted on the CCS website and also on the CCS YouTube channel. So you can always encourage all your friends to engage with this material, and this presentation will be available online beyond today. Although today, of course, is your chance to talk with Bridget in person and ask questions and have discussions and perhaps get her advice and insights on how you can use Michigan Climate Hub in your classroom. So I'm really delighted to welcome Bridget to the CCSN webinar. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom, your inspiration, your passion, and these wonderful resources that you have created working with so many teachers nationwide and especially in our beautiful state. So I'm already in awe with your beautiful slides, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I am just continually proud to be part of this climate education community, and you and your leadership has meant a lot to my journey for sure. So thanks everybody for joining. As you can see, I do wear multiple hats. So this presentation will kind of include my journey as a teacher, but then also as the state lead for Subject to Climate and the Michigan Climate Education Hub. And it is my sincere hope that you can take something from today's presentation to apply it to your own setting, or be able to really just kind of start thinking about what you can be doing in your climate education journey, knowing that I am here to support and would be more than happy to follow up with anybody at any point after this webinar, and certainly into the future. So again, thank you so much. And I do use she and her pronouns. I realize I forgot to put that in my Zoom box today. So, well, let's get started. Um, I'm going to have you kind of take a look at this as just sort of a way that I like to get students thinking about climate right off the get-go. It's one of my favorite tools. So when you are, thinking about how to introduce climate or to start talking about climate change with your students, no matter what age, art is a really wonderful way to introduce them and to get them thinking and talking and just sharing ideas. A lot of climate education is about creating a safe space so that students can explore and hear each other and be able to, talk about how it makes them feel to learn about the fact that the earth is changing and life as we know it is changing. And, we as humans need to respond. And that's a pretty heavy thing sometimes. So, as you look at these, just kind of think about, which piece of art is drawing your attention and why that might be, how it makes you feel. Think about how you might use art like this in your class to start some good discussions. Um, and know that there's all kinds of resources for how to use art in climate change that we will kind of talk about a little bit later in this webinar. Um, so these are images that were created by young people, and they are a part of a collection called the Turn It Around series. And I'm just going to take a minute to show you what this website looks like. So as you can see here, and I'm hoping, Elena, that you can see the Turn It Around website right now. Just verifying. Great. Awesome. Okay. So as you can see, this is a site that is a collection of artwork done by young people as a collection to basically get the attention of people and adults and to move climate education a little bit further forward. So what's great about this is that you can turn it around. You can look at the cards. You can see the discussion points to, use it as a tool, and then you can click to continue to find a little bit more information about the artist and about the artist's statement and that sort of thing. So this is a really wonderful resource. You can order the cards as a deck, but then you can also just use this digital resource. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that was something that was available. And then there's also this ArtX Climate Gallery, which is another place that you can go to find artwork done by young people. And you can see their grades and their artist statements. And just right off the get-go, this is a really wonderful way to start your students thinking not just about how they feel and how to talk about climate change, but also recognizing that these are young artists that are expressing themselves in really meaningful ways. And so this is a great way for young people to see themselves in a climate movement, right? Through art. So we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. I just thought that would be a nice place for us to begin because it is frequently where I like to begin with my students. Art is an entryway, right? It's an entry point for some hard topics. So consider that and how you might use that as you move forward. So today, I thought we would kind of approach things in this order, thinking about just climate education as a whole. I know I'm probably, if you're joining this webinar, singing to the choir a little bit about why it's needed. But, really kind of thinking about the urgency and what are the obstacles that prevent teachers from fully embracing it. Then I would just like to share my personal experience as an eighth grade science teacher trying to integrate it into the school where I teach. And, sometimes it definitely feels like an uphill battle, but over the last 3 years, I've really, I think, developed a model that is feels more successful every time I do it. And so I'm hoping that by sharing my process, you might be able to pick out something or, think about what might work for you. And again, this is a middle school example, but I do think that there's lots of different ways to scale it down or up, whether you're an elementary school teacher or high school or college even. So that'll be sort of the first half. And then the second half of the webinar today will focus on the hub and how you might use some of the resources on the hub to kind of start, figuring out what you might do the next school year, to introduce some lessons, but also to think about how you approach the whole process, what strategies are best, and, what are the things you need to be, really intentional about including in your climate education lessons. So, like I said, it's kind of a two-parter. So hopefully you will kind of see how the stuff I've been doing with my students is really easy to translate to resources that you can find on the hub to do something similar. So with that, let's just get right to it. So climate education, for anyone who's sort of new to it and to the term, we kind of like to just sort of make sure we're all starting from the same place, that it's something that leads students to understand and address the impacts of the climate crisis, empowering them with knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes to act as agents of change. So this United Nations definition is one that works really well in helping us think about like the ultimate goal is not just to teach people about like, oh, here's what's happening, here's all the scary stuff that we're going to see in the future, but how what we do now matters and that there are things we can do. So that's a really important thing. We want our students to know the science, but also understand and really develop partnerships in their own communities, understand the role they play in their community and how they can work together to create really meaningful climate solutions. And that's the wonderful thing about schools is they really are the heart of communities, right? And what happens in school really has the power to sort of leak into the broader community and to bring people together in ways that, I don't know, I think few other things have that ability. So I really look at climate education as being, something that can help us transform school culture. A lot of us who get sort of tired of school as it is and as it has been, especially in our public school systems, but to really think about how climate education, if done well, can really transform education in some powerful ways. So we know that we're already experiencing climate impacts here in Michigan and obviously globally. We are hearing it in the news all the time, whether it's labeled as climate change or not. We know what's happening when we're hearing about these storms and these wildfires and what's happening with our Great Lakes and biodiversity and all of that is connected, right? So it really is imperative that it becomes part of our education, right? Kids need to be hearing about it and learning about it, and not just in science class. So that's the other thing is that we really need to take a cross-curricular approach, and so that's going to be part of the model I share with you today. And it's really extra important because we know that young people are already experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety about it, right? I think most of us are, but especially with young people, we know that they are, experiencing really high rates of eco-anxiety, learning about a changing planet and not really feeling like they're equipped to do anything about it. And it really is starting to affect the future. I have many nieces and nephews that are either married or of the marrying age that are really talk about whether or not they will have kids, because they're concerned about bringing children into, the space where who knows what's going to happen. So that's a lot. That's pretty heavy stuff, right? So it really is imperative that this work is done and done meaningfully. So despite this, we know that there are still a good number of teachers that are not personally teaching climate change. We know that fewer than 4 out of 10 are personally teaching climate change in kind of a meaningful way. And that was through a survey by the North American Association of Environmental Education. Really some very interesting work done there, just kind of looking at the climate education landscape across the country. So I encourage you to look for that. That's on their website if you are looking for more of that data. So why aren't more teachers teaching climate change when we know it is the issue of our times, really? Well, because you know what it is to be a teacher, right? It is hard. There's a lot going on. There is a lot on your plate. There are many obstacles. So, if you just kind of pause for a minute and think, what are the obstacles you face? Chances are they might be one of these. That there's just no time, right? I know that for me, time is one of my biggest obstacles when it comes to new and different things that I'm trying to do as a teacher. It's busy and you've got a lot of requirements and mandates and things that you have to do. So it's not just finding the time in your day to teach it, it's finding the time to plan it and to be ready for it and all the parts and pieces, right? Sometimes it's not knowing where to go for the most useful resources. Fortunately, I have a lot of answers for that one today, but it can be a pretty overwhelming, right? To think about like, where do I even start and how do I know where to go to find the lessons and the resources that will work for me in my classroom and in my, age level. Many people are still in that boat of, I don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? And depending on your district, this is very real. I am fortunate in Haslett that, this doesn't seem to be a huge problem. But I have talked to many teachers who say, yeah, there's no way I could, mention climate change in my classroom. So thinking about ways to teach about climate without um, actually saying climate change, like that's a pretty big obstacle to overcome. So that's very real. Sometimes it's about confidence, right? Knowing, do I know enough to meaningfully teach climate change in a significant way, especially if I'm not a teacher of science? This is definitely something that we encounter quite a bit. And then finally, just, I have a curriculum. It's sort of there's a lot to it and there's really no time and climate is not part of it. I know that we face that in some of the science curriculum that schools or districts purchase. And, you're told to teach it with fidelity. And if yours doesn't include a climate unit, then, it might not be something that you feel comfortable inserting. So, given all of these things, it's no wonder that it's less than 4 out of 10, right? That's a great many obstacles, and I'm sure there's more that we, could discuss. But what I'm hoping to do with this webinar and in the work that I do on a regular basis is really try to just sort of eliminate as many of these obstacles as possible and to show you and other teachers that it's really all about just jumping in, right? And trying it and starting with where you are. And that's the most important part. But I think what is the probably the thing that made the biggest difference for me is really recognizing that I don't have to do this alone, right? That this is not the type of thing that I need to, sit in my classroom and plan all the lessons and have everything figured out in advance. That what I need to do is tap into some partnerships and think about who could do this work with me, including my students, and really allow that to be the place where we start building these partnerships and students start feeling like they have some agency in these climate lessons. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of talk you through like how I've been doing this work with my students. Greta Thunberg, of course, being an excellent role model for young people, just being out in front of the climate movement. And while it's really important for students to see themselves in her, that might also be a point of like, well, I can't be her. I can't do what she's doing. So it's really important that we are showing students, all through the process how they can be involved in whatever way feels comfortable to them. So, um, but showing young leaders, I think, is a really great place to begin with your students and thinking about like, what does climate action look like? So, how can we lead students to action? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? We want to create students and empower young people to feel like they have a voice and can play a role in climate solutions. So the simple answer is just open some doors, right? Give them some opportunities to lead. You are looking at two of my students, Harrison and Maya. And they are a big part of the story I'm about to tell because they are two incredible young climate leaders that Elena actually saw speak at the climate change summit that was in the spring. And so that's the key, right? To make them feel confident enough to be able to go from co-leading a session with me at the Michigan Science Teachers Association conference to speaking in front of hundreds of people at the Michigan Healthy Climate Conference. And that's Maya and Harrison there in the middle. So obviously some things happened in order to get them there and to help them feel like they could speak in that realm and that they have a voice in that way. So I'm just kind of walk you through that story and how it happened. So it kind of all began with a couple years ago with me, right? I am a passionate outdoor educator, and that's been a big part of my teaching practice for as long as I've been teaching, which is now 20 plus years. I started at a nature center, and so environmental education was always very important to me. And when I kind of transitioned to a classroom, I really started focusing on climate education before there were lots of resources about how to teach it. So I'm, trying to just find data for kids to look at and looking at, NASA and NOAA and all these things, but still feeling very much like this is on me as the science teacher to be able to, you know, not just show kids like what we mean by climate impacts, but also like try to convince them to care and to get involved in some way. And that's pretty heavy, right? So I started to get a little bit more involved with some state organizations. Already mentioned the Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Education. Got involved there as a member. Fabulous network of environmental educators. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you're not a part of it, please consider joining. Um, and as I, attended conferences and got to know some people, I started thinking that, I could do a little more here in this space. And so I joined the board. And once we had a conference on Beaver Island and invited Denise Keel, the executive director for the Michigan Climate Action Network, to be a keynote speaker, who just totally revved us all up about why we need to prioritize climate education, started working on this climate education committee, which is a joint effort between Mayo and MyCan. And then, of course, also being involved in the Eagles Michigan Green Schools program. All of those gave me the confidence to think about, okay, how can I do climate education in a more meaningful way? And so that's when I got involved in some national partnerships. I was made aware of the Sea Change Fellowship through the North American Association for Environmental Education. So the Sea Change Fellowship of 2023, with the support of Mayo, applied for that as one of only two teachers in the classroom. And my project around climate was to develop a cross-curricular middle school model. So that's, kind of really what led me to what happened next. But that's where I was introduced to Subject to Climate. I had no idea that this organization existed and that their whole goal is to make climate education as easy as possible for teachers. So it's free, curated resources that are vetted, and it just blew my mind. And so knowing that I had the support of the fellowship and the incredible people at NAAEE, and then this amazing site in Subject to Climate, I felt like I could do this climate action project. So through the fellowship, um, I was encouraged to think about not just, developing lessons with other teachers, but to really center student voice in the whole process, not just in the receiving of the lessons, but in building the lessons and advising on the lessons and telling teachers what they felt like they needed to know. And I can't tell you how life-changing that was for me. It really changed my practice and helped me understand that I didn't have to be a climate change expert to start really digging into more meaningful climate lessons. I just needed to open it up and help students see how we could do it together and that it really is a partnership. So even though I'm, teaching all of these eighth graders, I identified a leadership team right away through just a survey for all of them, asking about what they knew about climate change and how do they feel about it and all those preliminary questions. But also could use that to identify the students that I knew were passionate about it and were willing to put in a little extra work to be part of a leadership team. So that is just a huge part of the process, and I'm, going to continue to elaborate on that. But then, of course, finding my teacher buddies that were willing to venture into this with me. And at Haslett Middle School, we're really lucky to teach on teams. We do teaming, so we have each grade level is divided into two groups. And so I teach half the eighth grade and my teaching partner teaches the other half for science. But then on my team, I also have, an ELA teacher and a social studies teacher and a math teacher that all are teaching the same students. So, and they're just incredible humans. So I'm very lucky there. And they were so open to like, yes, let's do this. Let's think about how all of us can become climate educators. Just show us the way. And so they did need guidance. And fortunately, I've been doing it a while, so I knew what to do. And I also had Subject to Climate, so I knew how to share resources. And we had this student team that allowed them to learn from students about here's what we need, here's how it would be interesting. Don't inundate us. They helped us with timelines. They helped us understand how to give them opportunities to talk about it and to address emotions and all of those things. So there, all along the way, were opportunities for them to actually talk to us as a teaching team about what they needed and what they recommended. And, that just gave them immediate buy-in to the whole process. So, was very incredible to watch it all happen. And through that, we were able to kind of zero in on a unit that focused food and agriculture, and that happened through just conversations with, the teaching team and just trusting they know their curriculum and they know their standards. And so it was a very natural process of like, oh, here's what I do in science and how does that connect? Oh, we cover this, industrial revolution and all of these things. Interesting. How can that lead to more of a conversation on industrialized agriculture? And then how can we use language arts, which is a beautiful place for climate education to sit because of their wide open standards and the ability for students to read and write and talk and, have really valuable discussions. A lot of that happened, and especially the environmental justice piece, who's most impacted, how do our food systems, continue to marginalize people, and all of those conversations can be had there. And then really pulling in, other things like how do we continue to use art and who could be a community partner for us as well. So it just so happened at the time that the MSU Museum in East Lansing was part of had an exhibit called The Food Fight, which was all about industrialized agriculture. So it was very serendipitous, but it allowed us to, use this community partner, give students an opportunity to visit for free this amazing space and see how this really important climate topic was communicated through art and through different museum exhibits. So that's really kind of how the whole unit came together. And then it's culminated. So the first year, based on the visit to the museum, the leadership team decided that the best end of the year approach would be this Climate Solutions Museum. And so they all created an artifact that communicated a climate solution. It had to include, like, here's the problem, here's what we're experiencing, but here's what we could do about it, which they then shared with the rest of the school community as a museum. And in this picture, you can see the then superintendent and associate superintendent kind of checking it out and just really learning a ton from these kids. And so that first year, that was their climate action, was education, understanding how just talking about it and teaching the younger kids in the building is a way for them to be involved in climate action. And then the following year, did the same thing, right? Kind of tweaked some things, worked with the teaching team with a new leadership group because these eighth grade leaders have then moved on to high school. And so now I have this new team and they had some new ideas. And so, similar lessons, but kind of tweaked those along the way in the cross-curricular pattern. And they landed on an event at the end of the year that was more about several different climate action projects happening at the same time. So, some kids really focusing on no idling that they had signage for out in the parking lot, and other kids that were doing clothing exchange because they were focused on the climate impacts of fast fashion. Others that were focusing on cafeteria sustainability. And in this format, students actually presented more formally. We had a new superintendent this year who came and was blown away by these presentations, and based on some of those presentations and student voice and input, made some changes to the cafeteria. So the students were able to see how advocating turned into some real change that they could see, with changing from styrofoam to compostable lunch trays, and thinking about how do we continue to address food waste in the cafeteria and all of these other things that they had researched throughout their projects. And then this year, my team really had this vision of sort of imagining like two different futures. What happens if we do nothing, and what happens if we embrace climate solutions? And so their focus was, what is our climate future? And their projects needed to include some aspect of we use solutions. So what should be happening on a broader scale? What should government, institutions, agencies be doing? What can we as a school community do, and as a broader community around the school? And then what can individuals do? And with this format, um, it was really great for the students to be able to share with their younger counterparts, like, yeah, there's these big climate solutions that need to happen, but this is what we can do here, and this is what you can do at home. And so this event had both an inside and an outdoor component as well. And so these middle school students, the model has been that the eighth graders are really, getting these cross-curricular lessons and then diving in deep to solutions and research. And then they present these solutions to the rest of the student body. These sixth and seventh graders come through, and then they are able to voice, like, here's what we think we should do next year. This is what our school community should focus on. So this has really turned into an opportunity for older students to teach the younger students, and then see how that translates to action, especially the following school year. So this model I'm continuing to, it's not perfect and there's hardships along the way, but it's working so far in our setting, and it allows sixth and seventh grade students who's, might not be getting direct climate lessons yet to be introduced to it. And by the time they come to eighth grade, they are really ready to fully embrace it. So throughout this whole process, I also had that first year tap some amazing ninth graders at the time who were my students the previous year. So before I got the fellowship, I had thought of this group because they were just, amazing humans. And so I invited them to be part of the leadership team, and I was just blown away by where they took it. So I had this eighth grade team that was really great on advising about lessons, telling me what worked, what didn't work, thinking about the climate event. But then I also had this group of high schoolers who were quietly mentoring these eighth graders and also wanting to do more. They just were like ready. Like, how can we turn this into more sustainability efforts here in our district? And so I tapped, a partner, right? Denise Keel from the Michigan Climate Action Network. This is them zooming in with her, and she's just kind of talking them through. Here's how you should address your school board. Here's some of the things you want to think about in your presentation, and some things you might want to mention, and why climate education is important, and how they can lead in sustainability. And so then you see them presenting to the school board. Um, Fantastic, right? That's exactly what we want to see. We want to see them advocating based on, action that they themselves took. But then took it a step further, developed their own group, the Student Environmental Activism Leadership Team. They helped me plan and facilitate teacher PD. And so that was kind of the end of the fellowship, was inviting teachers, to learn a little bit more about climate education. And then the students led sessions on climate emotions and how to manage climate anxiety and some of these really important concepts, for which they were the best people to teach, right? About their own experiences. So just giving them the floor, right? And the confidence to be able to, present what they know with an authentic audience that is there to hear them really led to all of these other things. So from that came a district sustainability team on which they now sit, but also lead. So they actually lead the monthly meetings. They helped each building in our district earn Green School certification this year just by developing sort of a mentoring program for all these teachers. They continue to mentor the environmental groups at the middle school and the high school level. And they've now, presented at the Eagle Student Sustainability Summit on, the work that they're doing in their own district. And so, from all of that, they realized that, okay, so here we are, not just leading in school, but leading in their district. And then leading at a state level, because they are now part of the Michigan Youth Leaders for Environmental Stewardship, which is a statewide youth organization that's pretty newly developed. And here's them speaking at the last summit that was in last fall. And, on the Capitol steps, just doing their thing, being climate leaders. And when I started this whole thing, I never could have imagined that that's where it would land, honestly. But it's exactly what we want to see happen. And it's not necessarily the roadmap for every kid. Not everybody is going to feel comfortable standing at a podium in front of lots of different people. But it just really kind of showed me what can happen when adults arrive at climate education in partnership with their students and then sort of, get out of their way a little bit, right? Like I said, open some doors and then step aside because they're ready. They're ready to lead and they just need to be shown the way, right? So that's where it gets tricky for teachers, right? Like, okay, great. So these are some amazing young people. And yes, I had a fellowship that was kind of supporting me through that process, but it really was more, and that was great. And obviously I learned a lot through those partnerships, but it really just what it came down to was just sort of making up my mind to be like, okay, I'm going to do this ready or not. And if I'm not ready, I'm going to just say that to my students like, hey, we're doing this and we're going to figure it out together. And I can't tell you how important it is to just do that, right? Because otherwise, what you're just going to always be waiting. Um, Fortunately, you've got an amazing site to work with that's really going to take a lot of the guesswork out of it. You don't have to spend hours surfing the web and trying to figure out what's the best lesson plan for this grade level. You have the Michigan Climate Education Hub. So As I already said, Subject to Climate is a nonprofit online connector, and it's really all about removing all of those obstacles, just trying to share these resources and curate them in such a way that they're easy to find and easy to use, and they're all free. And you don't even have to, you don't have to, create an account, even though I highly encourage you to do that so that you can bookmark some resources. Um, but there's no paywall or anything that's going to pop up on you that's going to ask you for that. You might get a pop-up asking you to sign up for the newsletter, which I highly recommend because that's how you learn about the new resources that are constantly being added. So many good things happening on the regular. So Subject to Climate started creating these state hubs a couple years ago. Actually, New Jersey was the first state hub as they were, adapting to actually state mandated climate education, which is pretty fantastic. So now they have 8 state hubs. Michigan is number 7, lucky number 7. And so what's fabulous about them is they have all of the resources that are available on the Subject to Climate core site, but then there's also the place-based resources that make it even easier for you to teach about your place and to make sure that students are, thinking about climate change from, like what's happening here in Michigan. So just to give you kind of a quick look at what the site looks like, if you're familiar, great. Continue to explore. There's always something new to find. If you're not familiar, it's really easy to navigate. Kind of start with teaching materials. You can kind of see how it's broken into these 3 categories. We have resources from a variety of providers. And when you kind of open that link up, you can see how there's over 3,000 total resources. But then when you click on Michigan, you can see that there's the place-based resources, and we're, trying to add to those as much as possible as we develop or are made aware of new lessons and things that people are doing. Notice that you can search by grade, by subject area, and also by resource type. So you can see, if you're looking for just something quick, right? I just need a video, or I need a way to get kids outside, or I need a quick podcast. There's so many ways that you can search for the resources that you will use and can be inserted really easily into whatever you're doing in your classroom. Lessons, units, and activities. These are lessons written by teachers, and these are the full-on lesson plan that include the slides and everything. So you can, search these for if there's a specific topic that I just want to do something about food waste. Let's see how this pops up. And then here's some lessons, right? And you can see if you're a kindergarten teacher versus a 6th grade teacher, there's all kinds of things you can do. It tells you what subject areas are there. It connects it to the standards for you. So you can check those boxes when you're using these lessons because you are hitting those standards that you're required to hit, right? So there's all kinds of ways for you to just do those searches and find what you're needing for those materials. But then we also have all of these different ways that you can find additional support. So here I'm going to just kind of pop back to my slides so I can show you some more examples of those things. When you have time, if you haven't yet, I definitely encourage you to go to the Michigan Hub and create an account. And from there, you can actually bookmark the resources that you find, and then you don't have to search for them every time. You just go to your library. It makes it super easy. And then also sign up for the newsletter right away and start looking, right? It's summer. We have some time. So it's a great time to explore. One of the things that's really important in thinking about, how you're finding resources and how you're thinking about integrating these lessons into what you're already doing is to think about how it fits, right? With systems that are already in place. We as teachers know that we're not just teaching a subject. We're really teaching the whole kid, right? We're really trying to make sure that we're being culturally sensitive, that we are encouraging, empathy and these cross-cultural conversations. We are focused on social emotional learning. And we're thinking about like, okay, how do we embrace what is, a heavy topic with, all of these things in mind. So just know that when you find resources on the hub, the folks at Subject Climate are thinking about these things, right? They're including tips and ideas and, ways to expand on the lessons that are meant to embrace the whole child and how it's best for them to learn. And then also really thinking about these pedagogical approaches, right? Like thinking about it from this project-based component, we know how important choice is for kids. Yet it feels like they have very little of it, right? Oftentimes in a traditional school setting, it's still sort of a sit and get kind of, and it works that for some learning styles, but not for all. So really thinking about how do we engage with project-based learning, really letting kids dig in to a project. How do we make it so that it really helps them understand their place, right? Not just their school and their, school building, but the grounds around the school and their entire community. How do they see themselves there, right? And then also, and this is a great selling point for administrators and others who might, be a little skeptical about climate education, preparing these students for, these 21st century skills that we know they're going to need, that they're thinking about what does it mean? What does, sustainability mean? And how do we apply that to all of these systems that need updates? And how do we make these changes? And really encouraging them to problem solve and collaborate and be creative in their thinking. So, there's all kinds of different strategies for how you might start doing this, right? Um, I would encourage you to just really think about what's your entry point? And it might be that you're already there, right? And you've already been doing it and you're looking to expand. And so maybe that is thinking about how you can tag a teaching partner and start thinking about how you might just, between your two subject areas, how you might do it, or maybe even another first grade teacher. And how do we start getting our kids thinking about not necessarily talking about this is climate change, but really making them more aware of their place, which is really where climate education begins, right? Maybe it's that you love taking students outdoors. And that's one of the easiest entry points, right? Is getting them outside paying attention, doing weather data collection, looking at what happens to the trees every season, right? That's all part of climate education. Maybe it's about thinking about your daily routines and you know that you do a warm up every day. Why not make that warm up something that makes them think about climate or it helps them connect a climate concept to something else that you're doing? Maybe it is through your standards that you're like, okay, I'm supposed to teach this, but I don't love how it's been going. Like, how can I try to teach the same standard but bring climate into it, even if it's not a climate unit, right? How can I connect it in some other way? And that, of course, is also connected to your curriculum and how you're fitting that in. Passion and essential questions is really making space for you to respond to where your students are interested, right? Like what passions do they have? Are they, the artists that really want to, dig into that or, what do they care about? What do they want to do? And what questions do they have? Really thinking about how those are entry points, or places that you can really kind of expand what you're already doing. So the lessons and the resources you'll find on our hub are going to allow you to, kind of think about these different strategies and find the resources that fit with those things. Really want to encourage everyone to check out the professional development opportunities that are also part of the hub. Not only can you find Michigan-based PD opportunities that happen throughout the year, both in person and virtual. But there's also these asynchronous courses. So if one of your obstacles is, I don't feel like I know enough, right? Like, yes, I think it's important, but I don't, I'm a language arts teacher, or I need to brush up on my climate science, even as a science teacher, because I haven't taught it in a while. These three asynchronous courses are wonderfully done. You can do them in your own time. You don't have to sit and do it all at one time, but you can just do it as you can, fit it in. Climate Change Explained is really Climate Change 101. Um, it would be something that you could even have some older students do, just to sort of give them some of those basics, right? As an asynchronous opportunity. The climate change teaching tips is excellent for just keeping like, here's what you need to keep in mind, the best practice ideas around climate education. And then when you're ready to take it even further, what should you consider and how can you go about developing your own climate lessons using resources that you can find on the hub? So, all kinds of opportunities for you to grow in your capacity to be able to jump into climate ed. And then just, for me, it was really about finding the resources that I really love and just, figuring out how to build them in. So here's some examples of some things that are a part of the cross-curricular work that I do now in this third year that I've been doing it. Long since that fellowship ended, the work continues, right? So really trying to improve every year and, talk to my teaching partners about how to make it more meaningful across our subject areas. Um, so climate change charades is a really cool activity that gets you to, kind of a really nice way to introduce what do we mean by, climate impacts and to really address some of the misconceptions around climate and weather and all of those things. Really great place to start, right? So just kind of show you that when you um, find a resource like that, it gives you this quick synopsis. It gives you what's great about it, what students need to know ahead of time, ways that you can differentiate it and implement it in your own setting. Also, of course, the standards and what type of resources there, and then you can, jump into it. This particular one includes like an interactive charade style game where they have to act out some impacts and then they do some impact mapping. And it really is a meaningful way to get them to think about how all these impacts are connected, but then also how people and other life on Earth are not impacted equally. So it's a great way to get them to start thinking about, oh, this would be worse for who, right? High heat in our cities. Who's going to be most impacted by that? And they come to it, right? So that's one that I really love to introduce. And Beings on the Move is a great way to bring in the Indigenous perspective and thinking about how that inequity piece is not just humans, but all living things. How are plants and animals affected, and how are they, affected in ways that, it's not all the same. So that's another activity where students are moving. And so it's a great way to, kind of integrate that one. I want to make sure I have a minute to look at this one. This is an amazing resource that our social studies teachers now use, and it's a great way for students to start digging into the history around climate change and how long we've known about it and all these things that have happened along the way. So this is another one when you view the resource, you can go directly to this amazing timeline that introduces all of these concepts. This is definitely, for middle or high school students, but they can start making their own connections, right? So, I've just sort of developed some questions around what they notice, and then inevitably they get to this era of the Industrial Revolution and human population and all of these things, right, that help them understand why we are experiencing the impacts that we're experiencing. But then also, as they get to more recent times, they're seeing some positive things happening as well, right? They're seeing how young people are starting to jump in there and they're starting to make some differences, and they can start seeing themselves in these movements and, action and all of those things that we want them to be able to do. So there's lots of resources on the hub that will introduce them to young activists around the state and around the country and beyond. And then all kinds of ways that they can, again, use art, connect it to other subject areas. So you can tap other teachers in your building It doesn't just have to be the other science teachers. It could be your art teacher. It could be other people in the building who are open to kind of start thinking about ways that you can collaborate. So those are just some examples of some cross-curricular resources that I really love. Um, Here's some of the resources on the Hub that I think are really great for more student facing. And I use these every year as well. Most of, like when you're accessing the Hub, a lot of it is a teacher facing site, really meant for you to be, pulling it together. But these are ways that your students can actually use the Hub to get involved here. One of the best is this news articles for students. So these are just all kinds of topics, and you can narrow that down to whatever you want. Maybe it's land use, right? And you can quickly look at these. And so, oh, here's one about cattle, and we were just talking about agriculture. um, you can assign that and you can level it. So you can say, oh, I want that to be for my 10th graders, and I'm going to assign it right through Google Classroom. And so, again, a quick entry point, maybe it's a quick read and it's not necessarily tied to a whole nother lesson, but it connects to something else that you're doing. That's a quick and easy way to integrate, a climate piece into your lesson, right? And then these climate change explainers are another thing that you can access here, and you can look at causes, impacts, solutions. So I have students actually access these when they're doing their research, their climate solution projects. They can actually get a little more information on, why is this a problem? What are we experiencing now because of it? And then what solutions are there? So it really provides more of that foundational stuff, that you might not have time to make a whole lesson out of it, but you can make sure kids have access to it as they are digging in a little bit more to some of those project-based opportunities you're providing. So those are great foundational things. And then just also, there's so many resources that just help you really, again, think about these really important concepts. We have something on the Hub that are called teacher guides. And this is one of my favorite teacher guides that we have. And it's all around these mental health resources that help you engage with these toolkits from the Climate Mental Health Network, and just really thoughtful lessons, not just for like what you can do with your students, but also for you as a climate educator, to be able to keep your own wellness in mind and your own stress in mind as you're trying to do all the things. This is an amazing resource, and I really encourage you to dig into that as well. And there's, teacher guides for all kinds of things. We have a whole Earth Month calendar, and, a whole teaching guide around Jane Goodall and the work that she does and has done through her institute and all those kinds of things. So um, it's just, it takes the guesswork out of trying to find all the best resources, because you can find them all in this one spot, right? And then just a reminder as we're wrapping things up here that no matter how you do it, we really want to wrap it all in hope, right? And in really helping kids understand that it is not a hopeless situation, that we can do things and they can do meaningful work, and sometimes they can lead the adults, right? As long as we have a solutions focus and we give them opportunities to act in some way. This Venn diagram is an amazing tool that you can use with students. This is by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and it wrote an incredible book called What If We Get It Right? I highly encourage you to read that. But really thinking about this cross section between, what skills do you have? What are you good at? What brings you joy and happiness? And then what needs done? What's the work that needs doing? So really focusing climate action into the center of this Venn diagram for students also helps them see that not only is this important work, but it can actually be fun and something that really brings a lot of joy, and in the end eases that eco anxiety that we know that they have, because they feel like they are doing something about it. So these lead to some action tools that are also part of the hub. that I can definitely make sure Elena's kind of sharing the tools that I'm sharing in this webinar with all of you. And really the important thing is that we are doing this in partnership, right? We have to embrace this huge global problem with an all hands on deck situation. We don't want young people to feel like this is their problem to solve, right? However, it is important for the adults to, like I said, open the doors, share the resources, provide the opportunities, hand them the microphone, right? Give them authentic places to speak and act and share. And then they aren't just lessons in school, they are really meaningful ways for them to become leaders in this space. So this is just a quick and easy way to grab the sign up for the newsletter and just a way to stay involved and to give us opportunities to connect with you beyond this webinar. And then I know we're at 4 o'clock, but if you have questions, Elena can give you some ideas about how you might share those.
So first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you, Bridget, for your so empowering and inspiring and absolutely amazing presentation. And what an incredible resource. Like I am just in awe of how much you were able to put in this 1 hour. And it's just such a great inspirational model for teaching kids about climate change. So yes, we do have Q&A, and just before we start the Q&A, Bridget, if we run out of time or if we get disconnected, what is the best way for the audience to connect with you? Do you like to share your email or website? Like what is the best way, subject to climate, right?
Yeah, I think probably email would be best. You can obviously go to the hub there and learn a little bit more about that. But if you have questions for me specifically, my website is here. And through the Subject Climate site email address is probably the best way for me to not lose it in my school email or or any of that. So yes, please feel free to reach out. I would love to brainstorm, support, answer more questions about anything that might have come up for you as I was doing all that talking.
Thank you. Thank you. So we can take a couple of live questions. Again, if you are online right now, you can open Q&A. If Q&A doesn't show immediately on your screen at the bottom of the screen, you can click on more, and then you will see Q&A, and you can just type your question. We're going to unmute you, but you can type your question, and we'll read it loud for Bridget to answer. And again, if you want to engage for a longer conversation, definitely email would be the best way to connect. So meanwhile, I just wanted to say, I had a pleasure to attend the presentation of your students at the Michigan Healthy Climate Conference in Detroit, and I was absolutely blown away. I think it was like really the best presentation at the entire conference, and you were so modest in the kind of in the background. You were not with them on the stage. You really just showed them the way, and you were there for them, and you were supporting them. But they did it completely on their own. So what is the secret of leadership? How do you empower your students to the extent that they're so confident, they're so well prepared to lead the adults and engage in climate action? Like, what is your secret sauce as a teacher?
Oh, well, thank you for saying all of that. Those are very kind words. I know they make me so proud. Well, first of all, I will say that, I'm lucky that they are very exceptional young people. So there is that. But I do think, and the reason they can say, oh, we're able to do this because of our teacher is because, I think the secret is again just to create authentic spaces for them to feel like they have a say, right? It's really interesting how much as teachers, without even meaning to, we're just planning all this stuff, all these lessons to present to them. And really, what they so appreciated about this whole process was me, first of all, tapping them saying, I remember you and I recognize you as someone who cares and, could add something really meaningful to this. What are your thoughts? And then just letting them sit at the table, right? So a lot of it was squashing my urge, which I think a lot of us adults just naturally have this like, oh, here's what we're going to do. And then just saying, what ideas do you have? How do you think it should go? And then allowing them to lead. And they were the ones that would be like, hey, can we lead the meetings of the sustainability team? And be like, yeah, that would be great. So I think once they saw themselves as partners, and that really just happened because I stopped talking and listened and really, just made space for their ideas. I think then they had grew the confidence to realize like, hey, I do have some valuable things to share and some things that maybe adults don't know that is a good perspective. So yeah, just listening.
This is, I think, a great lesson for all educators at any any level. We
Absolutely.
all need to learn how to do it better. So I want again to invite the audience to send questions through Q&A. And I have one more question meanwhile. You mentioned also that you really enjoy working with your colleagues and you work across the kind of curriculum divides and grades, and you work with your social studies and math and ELA colleagues. And again, like how you're able to create such a collaborative space, because very often when I work with schools, I work with teachers, very often I hear how difficult it is to work across those curriculum divides, and different, like, people try to navigate within their state standards of their own subject
Mhm.
matter that they teach, and it's very difficult sometimes to build those collaborative teams. So what is your advice? I know how we all can do better job collaborating across those subject boundaries, and
Yeah.
how Subject to Climate and Michigan Climate Hub can help us all to gain confidence
Hmm.
in building those
Yes.
cross-disciplinary connections.
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think that well, I started, and again, my situation is a little unique in that I was part of a fellowship, and so my administrators knew that. And so I actually started with a presentation at a staff meeting saying, here's what I want to do. Who's with me? And it actually just so happened that it was my team, the eighth grade team that was like, yeah, we're in. We want to be part of this. And that's since then it has been harder for me to, get some of the other grade levels involved. Um, I think, and again, I'm lucky because we teach on teams. And so that makes it easy because we have the same students and we have team meetings. And so we really could just build it into a structure that was already in place. And that would be my first bit of advice would be to think about when you're already talking as a group of teachers, because unfortunately, we're not really given a lot of time to collaborate. Like our PDs are loaded with other stuff. And, when you're told to collaborate as a team, there's all these other things that you're supposed to be talking about. So these cross-curricular lessons it's hard to create space for that. So think about when you are authentically meeting and can have some of these conversations. And I would say, if you're not on a team or if you're really just trying to think about how to branch out to like one other space, it really does help to go to a teacher with a resource already, right? Like I found this amazing timeline on, the Michigan Climate Education Hub. It would fit really well with what I think you're doing in history and social studies. And would you be interested in connecting that to some of the work I'm doing, around the greenhouse effect or whatever? So I think taking as much of the work, from a teacher who might be less enthusiastic or reluctant to join you and just say, here's a resource, check it out. That's, I think, a really good place to start. And that's where the hub makes it so much easier because you can kind of start finding those connections yourself. And then I actually, before the hub was around, I created a Google Classroom, which teachers are pretty used to already using and accessing. I just started throwing resources in by like, oh, here's some cool social studies ones, here's some cool language arts ones, and then I just invited all the teachers to it. And that's another great way for them to start exploring. And then of course you want to put the Michigan Climate Education Hub right at the top is like this is the one-stop shop, but here are some cool things that I found there. Um, so those would be some suggestions I'd have.
Thank you again, Bridget, for sharing your amazing, amazing work, amazing experience, and this really incredible resource. So thank you so much. We are running out of time. So I just want to wish you great continuation with your work. And I hope we'll catch up soon at one of climate events around
Yes,
Michigan.
there's always some good ones coming. Thank you so much. It was really nice to kind of connect these things, and I hope it's useful, and I just love being part of your network. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you and have a wonderful summer.
Thank you. You too.